In 1994, Revolution Software released Beneath a Steel Sky, one of the most influential adventure games ever made. The game was quite revolutionary, for the point-and-click adventure genre, introducing user-friendly UI that has been used in many adventure games and is being used even to this day. In fact, if you download and start up Adventure Game Studio, you'll find that there's an entire build named after the game. It was a massive hit, and I personally consider it Revolution Software's best work yet. But for some reason, the game never got a sequel despite its success. Ever since the release of Broken Sword: The Shadow of the Templars, Revolution Software has only been working on sequels for that game, and yet none for this one. Which is surprising, because talks of a sequel between Charles Cecil and Dave Gibbons have been going on ever since the initial release of the game. However, nothing came of it. In fact, Cecil was convinced that Beneath a Steel Sky was soon bound to drift into obscurity, because the game was written for both MS-DOS and Amiga, and since the Amiga was discontinued in 1996, the only way the game could have been played was on MS-DOS. And with Microsoft ending support for MS-DOS in favor of Windows, 2001 computers and beyond, wouldn't be capable of playing it. However, around that time, the team behind ScumVM approached Revolution Software with their plans to rewrite classic point-and-click adventures to work on modern hardware. So Revolution Software provided them with the original codes of both Lure of the Temptress and Beneath a Steel Sky. And once both games were fully working on modern hardware, they re-released them as freeware on GOG, which resulted in a resurgence in Beneath a Steel Sky's popularity. And with all the love it got, a sequel had to be made. So now, 26 years after the release of Beneath a Steel Sky, we finally get the long-awaited sequel, Beyond the Steel Sky. The game was first announced during the Apple Arcade presentation and was set to be one of its launch titles. A month later, it was released on PC, and there are plans to release it on the Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, and the PlayStation during the third quarter of 2021. This was huge news for fans of the original game, and fans of Revolution Software in general. Many adventure gamers were excited at the thought of a sequel to one of the best adventure games ever made, but were also cautious due to the game's new look and not so encouraging initial trailer. And I don't blame them. If you recall, in my review of Beneath a Steel Sky, I mentioned that I don't think the game needs a sequel. It was a complete story with a satisfying ending that needed no continuation. And the first trailer did not impress me enough to change my mind, so I wasn't looking forward to playing it. Partly because certain games have made me feel cautious about revivals of my favorite games, and partly because I wasn't a fan of the change in art style. It's not that I can't accept the sequel being in 3D, but rather because the game seemed to have lost its charm. When I look at Beneath a Steel Sky, I see Beneath a Steel Sky. I see a game that managed to stand out amidst a sea of beautiful looking games. But when I look at Beyond the Steel Sky, I see a generic-looking, Telltale-like game. So I wasn't really looking forward to this game, I just wanted to play it out of morbid curiosity. But now that I've played it, what do I think? Long story short, I was pleasantly surprised. It's not as good as Beneath a Steel Sky, and I have a lot of issues with it, but I still think Beyond the Steel Sky is a very good game, and a decent sequel to a great game. And in this video, I'd like to talk about what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, and how it compares to the first game. Spoiler warning, I will be spoiling a lot about this game, including the ending. If you're planning to play it, I suggest you do so before watching this video. If you want my quick thoughts on it before buying it, I think the story is good, but has some weird decisions that held it back, some of which even contradict the events of the first game. I do recommend the game for both fans of the first game and fans of the genre. For those who want to continue watching, bear in mind that I will also be spoiling major plot points from the first game, including the ending. I'm afraid that's unavoidable, since I can't really talk about the story of this one without talking about the story of Beneath a Steel Sky. So if you haven't played that yet, I suggest you do so before watching this video. I mean, the game is free on both Steam and GOG, you really don't have any excuse not to. Anyway, without further ado, grab a drink, sit back, and enjoy the video. First off, let's talk about the visuals. My initial thoughts on the game still stand. This looks like a generic 3D game attempting a comic book art style. However, generic doesn't mean bad, as I think the devs did a great job at making it look like a comic. And all things considered, it's a pretty good looking game. especially the vistas within the city. First time I saw this view, I was quite impressed. Plus, it's nice to see more of Union City, seeing how all we saw in the first game was just a few screens. I also like the animations. They're pretty believable and really expressive, especially the facial animations. Even the robots are expressive, and you can tell their personalities just by the way their bodies move. Though I will admit the repeated animations were a bit distracting, especially the more exaggerated ones. However, that's understandable since Revolution Software isn't what you'd call a AAA studio, so I can't expect every conversation to be fully animated. And I'd much rather the game have repeated animations than the characters just standing there, barely moving. Besides, I think the devs did a good job at hiding it by having these repeated animations fit what the character is saying. Overall, even though the game doesn't necessarily stand out when compared to its peers, it was still a pleasant game to look at. Though the texture popping that happened every time you enter a new area was a bit of an eyesore. So was the game's comic book-like intro. Much like in Beneath a Steel Sky, the intro is presented as a comic book, and it was also drawn by Dave Gibbons. I didn't like his work on the remakes of both Broken Sword 1 and 2, so I shouldn't have expected any better. But this is a sequel to Beneath a Steel Sky. If he was gonna put in the effort on any game, it should have been this one. Sadly, much like with Broken Sword 1 and 2, the comic looks generic and uninspired. I can't believe that these two comics were drawn by the same person. As for the music, I'm a bit torn. On the one hand, the music is quite good and I don't really have any issues with it. It's not the type of music I would listen to on its own, but as background music, it fits perfectly. On the other hand, it has no personality whatsoever. It's just good orchestral background music, but nothing about it feels cyberpunk to me.
On the floor showed my buddy Joey just as I remembered him, when I left him in charge all those years ago.
Compare it to the music of the first game, which was absolutely brilliant, and you'll see what I mean. The music in Beneath a Steel Sky had a lot of personality, and each track is instantly recognizable. And when I think cyberpunk, this is what I expect. All of that was missing in this game. Now it just sounds like generic background music.
I'd already decided it was going to be my last night in Max's village. I was sorry to be leaving, but I was restless again.
Beware! The day grows dark, and demons stalk the gap by night.
Good, sure, but generic nonetheless. In fact, if you play any track from Beyond the Steel Sky without telling me where it's from, I probably wouldn't even recognize it. And that's just sad.
Hearing her name had triggered a total change in the girl's behavior. I needed to find a way to get her down before she fell.
Though I do appreciate the nods they made towards the music composed by the late Dave Cummins. In the museum, you can hear tracks from the first game playing during the exhibit presentations.
In the Savior's name, the Council formed the 5 ministries that continue to guide Union City in this new golden era.
And when you revisit Link Space, you'll hear the same Link Space music from the first game. I thought that was pretty neat. I also have mixed feelings about the story, and once again, on the one hand, I liked it a lot, and I thought it was a decent continuation to a story that didn't really need one. On the other hand, there are a lot of things about it that just didn't add up. The story takes place 10 years after the events of the first game. Robert Foster is now living in the Gap, with a new tribe. One day, whilst fishing with his friend and his friend's son, Milo, androids come out of nowhere, kidnap Milo, and critically injure his father. After vowing to Milo's mother that he will find him, Foster sets off and follows the vehicle's tracks until it leads him to Union City. Due to Union City's new security laws, he finds it very difficult to enter the city without a citizen's chip. Luckily, he meets a hacker named Amber who helps him by implanting the chip of a deceased citizen into his palm. Now he can enter the city as Graham Grundy, the chip's previous owner. Upon entering Union City, Foster finds that it has become somewhat of a utopia. Everyone seems to be happy, all their needs are met, and the Union City he once visited 10 years ago was no more. Before we move on, here's where I need to spoil the story of the first game. 10 years ago, Union City was an authoritarian dystopia controlled by the tyrannical AI known as Link. No, I already made that joke, not gonna make it again. Link was created by Robert's father. The idea was to have an AI system that could be controlled via a biological host. But instead, it became self-aware and it took over his father's body. And once he became too worn out, Link called for Robert's retrieval to replace his father. At the end, Robert comes face to face with Link's main port, and as his father dies within his hands, Link tries to merge with Robert's body. But before it could, Robert asks Ken to take his place. As an android, Ken manages to control Link, and Robert decides to leave him in charge of Union City. Now I need to explain who Ken is before continuing the story of the sequel. When Foster was living in the Gap, he built his own robot friend named Joey. During the first game, Joey loses his shell, so Robert takes out his circuit board and downloads his data onto an android. That android's name is Ken. Remember that, this is very important to the story of Beyond the Steel Sky. Anyway, Robert finds out that Ken is no longer in charge of Union City, and the city is now being run by the council. Foster learns that this council was left in charge by Ken, right before he left the city and disappeared into the horizon. And when talking to the people of Union City, you will notice that they treat Ken as a sort of savior, with an entire religion built around him. There's even a museum dedicated to tell the story of how Ken saved them from the tyranny of Link. Now they never need to worry about someone breaking their pots. Dang it, I said I'm not gonna make that joke. During this footage I've been showing you, you've probably noticed that nobody is actually referring to him as Ken, but instead they're calling him Joey. Now, this rant I'm about to go on might seem like a nitpick, but hear me out. Joey is the circuit board. Ken is an android with a copy of Joey's data downloaded onto it. They're not the same person. You can clearly tell the difference in their personalities. Joey is sarcastic, kinda mean-spirited, and acts a lot more like a human.
Welcome back, Joey.
Is this the best shell you could find?
Listen, we're in deep trouble.
You've turned me into a vacuum cleaner.
It's functional. Don't be ungrateful.
Whilst Ken is very polite, a lot nicer, and a lot more AI-like.
What's wrong with you?
I appear to have a problem, sir. My hand has melted onto the door.
I don't like to leave you here.
I'll be free in no time, sir.
This is Joey. This is not. You'd think the devs would know that. Now, it has been 26 years since Beneath a Steel Sky, so it's safe to assume that most of the original developers who worked on the first game did not return for its sequel for one reason or another. However, Cecil worked on the story of both games, and sure, 26 years is a long time, but you'd think he'd remember something as important as Ken's name. And this isn't just a minor oversight. We can agree that it's not unreasonable to expect the new developers to actually play the first game in order to make its sequel, right? If they have played it, they'd have known this. If they didn't know, then it can mean one of two things. Either they didn't play the first game, and I don't need to explain why that would be a bad thing, or they didn't pay enough attention. Which begs the question, what other contradictions managed to slip between their fingers? Quite a few, unfortunately, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So yeah, even though the game called him Joey, I'm gonna continue calling him Ken. Okay, rant over. Like I said, on the surface, everything seems to be fine, and everyone appears to be happy. From the looks of it, all jobs are being carried out by droids, and all humans have their needs met by the Council. But the more Robert digs in, the more he realizes that something is very wrong here. Who is the Council? What actually happened to Ken? Why is everyone acting in a weird way when you mention Milo's kidnapping? And who is this Grundy guy? How did he die? Why was his chip tampered with? At this point, we start noticing that even though everyone seems happy, there's still a system that ensures some people are at the top and others are left with crumbs. Instead of currency, people seem to be motivated by kudos points, which are awarded for good deeds and achievements. The more points you get, the higher your kudos rank is. And the higher your rank is, the more privileges are available for you. And because of Grundy's disappearance for 2 weeks, his kudos rank sank to C rank. It all seems not that different from the Link status system from the first game, and that alone should raise a lot of red flags. So by this point, I was completely hooked, and I genuinely wanted to know more, despite the whole Ken and Joey thing.
His name is not Joey, it's Ken!
However, there were other questions running through my mind that I wanted answers for, yet we never get a satisfying one. For example, what happened to Hobbins? At the end of the first game, Foster leaves Hobbins to help Ken and make sure that he's doing a good job. It's not like I mind him not being in the game, but at the very least Foster should have asked about him, no? After all, he did dump the responsibility of the city on him. Also, is 10 years really enough? Hear me out. The last time Foster saw this city, it was a dystopian mess. It was ugly, uninviting, and quite depressing in general. And the most advanced robots they had were industrial ones who had just 1 or 2 tasks they were programmed to do. Now we see a technological paradise where everything is being done by droids with their own personalities. The city is now being managed by Minos, a new AI developed by Ken himself, one that puts Link to shame. We see advanced hologram technology, and a very convenient traveling system. This is not the same Union City at all. And I'm left here wondering, is 10 years enough for all of this? I imagine automating all jobs would take a bit more than 10 years, let alone turning a dystopia into a utopia. And I think it would take a lot more than 10 years to build an entire religion around Ken. Most people alive right now in Union City were probably around 10 years ago when Ken and Foster saved the city. So it feels a bit weird to see people treat him like a savior figure. And it seems that nobody remembers how the city was under Link's rule. They even have a section in the museum called Old History, where you see bits and pieces of how life was before Ken saved the city. Again, the majority of the citizens should have been around 10 years ago. 10 years is just not long enough. Another issue I have with the story is I feel like the later parts are kinda rushed, and some subplots seem to be left unfinished or unexplored. It turns out that the Council is the one kidnapping Gap children, Milo being one of them. They are using them to conduct experiments on them. Graham Grundy found out about these kidnappings one day and decided to start a resistance movement to uncover the Council's secrets. And I feel like this part of the story wasn't expanded upon properly. We're barely told anything about this supposed resistance, and we only get to see 3 of its members, Grundy being one of them. This could have been a great subplot for the game, but any talk of the resistance group goes as fast as it comes. By the way, you've probably noticed that I have not been showing you the 3rd member of the Resistance. Wanna guess who it is? It's someone you know from the original game. Done guessing?
My real name is...
Robert!
Danielle Piermont?
Yup, it's Mrs. Piermont. I could write a whole essay on why this makes absolutely no sense, but I'll try to keep things short. Of all the characters in the first game that could have been part of this resistance, Mrs. Piermont would be the second to last person I'd think of, with Lamb being the last.
Is your coat made of real fur?
That's right, real beaver fur. Made from the last 10 beavers in the world.
She was an upper-class lady who didn't care about anyone other than herself and her dog. She didn't seem to care much for Gap children.
How do I get out of the city?
Now, why would you want to do that? There's nothing in the Gap but sand and savages.
Nor did she seem to care about the poor and the working class.
Had you met Hobbins before this incident?
I don't recall ever seeing him. But one takes little notice of mere maintenance men.
So why her? Is it for fan service? You'd think seeing a hologram of her at the museum would have been more than enough for that.
As I surveyed the room, I was greeted by a familiar face.
Hello, darling!
Hey, here's an idea. Remember when I mentioned that we never see what happened to Hobbins? He could have been the head of the resistance. Maybe he found out what the council was doing and decided to start a resistance movement against them. That would have made a lot more sense than Mrs. Piermont. We later find out that the reason the city never runs out of food and resources was because the council stole it all from Asio City. Apparently, the council was lying to their people about their partnership with their neighboring city, and were basically robbing it of all its resources, rendering it a desolate wasteland. This is a very heavy subject, so you'd think the writers would have given it more importance, right? How do we find out about this? We hear it from this quirky hacker named Leet. Literally 2 sentences about this very important plot device is all we get. To make matters worse, Leet is presented as a conspiracy theorist, so we really have no reason to take what he says seriously. This is such an awful way to treat this matter. Why not have an entire chapter set in Asio City? Maybe whilst Foster is following Grundy's trail, it leads him to Asio City, and he sees the destruction for himself. That would have been a lot more effective, wouldn't it? My last issue with the story is regarding the final revelation. So apparently the council isn't actually real, and it was all Ken's doing. He reprogrammed androids from the first game, and used hologram technology to make them look like humans. He was behind everything all along. Behind the city's new oppressive system, behind the kidnappings, behind Asio City's destruction, all of it was his fault. And although I thought this was a great plot twist, I don't like the reasoning behind it. Ken keeps mentioning something about the directive, and after Foster manages to beat him, we find out that he did all of this because of Foster's instructions. Right before leaving the city, Robert told Ken to make the people happy. And being an AI, he took that as a directive, and he started finding ways to make people happy. But again, since he's an AI, he misunderstood what happiness is, and ended up doing more harm than good. This makes it seem like it was all technically Robert's fault. Nice plot twist. Would have been really good. Too bad it's based on another contradiction. Foster never said that. He never told Ken to make the people happy. And he didn't leave him alone either. He left him in the capable hands of Hobbins. For those who haven't played the first game, or those who need a refresher, this was the last conversation between Foster and Ken.
Hello, Mr. Hobbins.
Hello, son. What do you want?
I've come to say goodbye.
You still plan to go back to the Gap?
Yeah, I've had it with city life. I'm certainly gonna miss you both. Why don't you come too?
We got enough to do. Getting Union City back to normal.
I reckon you'll make a great team.
Will you come back to visit us, sir?
I'm not sure about that, Ken. But I'll be thinking of you. Oh, by the way, Mr. Hobbins. Here's your wrench.
Thanks, son. I'll need that if Ken gives me any trouble.
Goodbye, friends. And thanks.
Be vigilant.
At no point did he tell Ken to make the people happy. Unless there's a deleted scene where Foster popped in right before he left and went, "Oh, one more thing, Ken. Make the people happy." This entire plot twist relies on something that never happened. and that completely ruins it for me. Sure, Foster should have visited Union City more often, but the fact that Ken is gaslighting him over this is beyond infuriating. Nonetheless, I still like the game's story, despite all of my issues with it. The main plot is pretty good, and I really like the story's main message, how you can't rely on an AI to determine what happiness is. I also like this final part where Robert destroys Ken's logic in regards to the Council's achievements. Aspiration is nice and all, but when you use it to pit people against each other, all you're doing is introducing an unnecessary hierarchy where instead of trying to better themselves, people are trying to just be better than everyone else. Mental and physical well-being is very important, but to use it as a way to keep tabs on problematic people and to ensure that everyone thinks they're happy, rather than ensure that everyone is actually content with life, is quite terrifying. Security is important, but not at the expense of freedom, and it should never be used to make people scared of what they don't understand. Ken was literally spreading propaganda against the people of the Gap in order to make the citizens of Union City scared of outsiders. And sure, providing people with all their needs is a good thing, but not at the expense of another city's well-being. This could easily be achieved through focusing on local production and some trading between cities when necessary. The only thing I didn't agree with Foster on was his points against the Ministry of Comfort. He talks about how when robots do everything for people, people start becoming entitled and lazy. And I genuinely don't believe that. Heck, we don't even see that during the game itself. Some people still have jobs that require a human's perspective, such as Grundy himself. And those who don't have jobs are still going out, socializing, and doing things that make them feel better. In a world where all human needs are provided, I don't see any issue with full automation. The less jobs we need to do, the more time we have to pursue our own dreams and aspirations, without needing to worry about starving or being homeless. Not everyone will become inactive if they didn't have a job they were forced to do. In fact, I reckon the majority of people will still find something to do. A lot of people do love to work, so long as the job isn't draining them of all their energy, and isn't necessary for them to survive. So yeah, good story, all things considered. I had my issues with it, some of which are bigger than others, but I still consider it a decent continuation of the first game's story. The pacing is good, the main plot is interesting, and the game's overall message is thought-provoking. And that's not even mentioning the excellent writing.
You've got a problem with your ID. I've got a problem with mine. The solution to both our problems lies in Minos. But thanks to Graham's selfish inability to not die, I can't access the system.
The jokes were good.
There was once an A from place B, with unforeseen predicate P. Factor F occurred next, which resulted in X, and hilarious consequence C.
The dramatic moments were very effective.
Why is it so tight? To stop you getting away, you idiot! What's the cleaver for? What do you think? One more U-chip for my trade, and 2 more thumbs for my collection.
And some lines in the game really hit me, such as this one where Robert asks a droid for his power cell.
Mind if I borrow your power cell?
But I would power down. Cease to exist.
That's taking a pretty pessimistic view.
Wouldn't you in my position?
Think of it as a well-earned retirement.
Sounds more like death.
That line really got me, and I genuinely felt sorry for him.
Have you seen a boy called Milo?
Gaplander or citizen?
Gaplander.
All Gaplanders look the same to me.
He's quite young and about this tall?
Repeat, all Gaplanders look the same to me.
Then I remembered that he's a racist prick, so... Also, the game is full of pop culture references that I truly appreciated, such as the fantastic Monty Python reference.
How's your head?
'Tis but a scratch.
And the much more surprising, much more appreciated Don't Hug Me I'm Scared reference.
You heard me. What's your favorite color?
Green?
Green. Green is not a creative color.
I also really like the broken sword references.
A sword? The blade was cracked.
I'm really happy with how this game is written, and I truly love its characters. Except for Joey, he kinda sucks in this game.
What year is it?
Oh, relax. You were only unplugged for a moment.
Everything I ever loved is dead. Oh, hey, Foster. You're here too, huh?
Joey in the first game was a sarcastic sidekick and only talked when he needed to. Sure, he was an asshole at times, but he was also a solid character and a good friend to Foster. In this game, however, he is nothing more than a comic relief character.
The bunting's tangled in my brushes. My motor! I think my motor is on fire! Foster! I'm too young and talented to die!
He never shuts up and he keeps trying to butt in with his unfunny remarks.
Is Officer Arana coming tonight?
Why do you ask? Are you in need of well-being support?
He loves her.
I want you to watch this scene.
Oh, Rana dear, don't be hard on yourself. Graham knew what he was doing.
So you were both friends with Graham?
I didn't think he had any friends.
Friends, allies, whatever you want to call it.
Graham was working at the land train entrance when he saw one of these things coming into the city.
These things? You mean the stalkers?
I thought they were called creepers.
We call them walkers. Whatever they're called. Here comes another one.
See how the other characters don't even acknowledge his existence? In fact, I bet if I removed all his lines in this conversation, nothing of importance would have been lost. Watch, I'll prove it.
Oh, Rana dear, don't be hard on yourself. Graham knew what he was doing.
So you were both friends with Graham?
Friends, allies, whatever you want to call it.
Graham was working at the land train entrance when he saw one of these things coming into the city.
These things? You mean the stalkers?
We call them walkers. Whatever they're called. Here comes another one.
I wish I could say that if they ever make a third game, they might make him more likable, but I can't, because, spoiler alert, Joey dies in this game. He sacrifices himself to help the kidnapped kids escape. I should feel sad, and if it was Joey from the first game, I would. But in this game, I barely felt anything because of how much I disliked him. Thankfully, other than Joey, I loved every other character in this game. I especially liked Alonzo, the well-being officer who ends up being kind of a minor antagonist.
When someone goes off-grid, there's usually some underlying trouble. And as a mentor, I like to think of myself as a bit of a troubleshooter.
I love his passive-aggressive personality hidden under a layer of good manners. It's so entertaining.
You strike me as a fine young officer of the Ministry of Well-Being. Would you say that's an accurate description?
I'm flattered, sir.
Your record is exemplary, I believe.
I do my best, sir.
I'm sure you do. So please, don't let me down. Fix this mess.
Mess? You mean the girl?
The whole untidy situation.
And by the end, you can see that he has had enough of Foster, and is actually taking pleasure in getting rid of him.
That would defy the rules. And that is why, on behalf of this city, for which I care deeply, I intend to make a rather dramatic correction. Goodbye, Graham Grundy.
He was such a good villain, and I enjoyed every moment he was on screen. Part of what made him such a good character was his voice actor's excellent performance. Alonzo was voiced by Neil Newbin, who you may recognize as the voice of Nikolai from the Resident Evil 3 remake.
Now I know you can't put a price on life. But I'm in this business to get paid. So let's make a deal.
And the voice of Heisenberg from Resident Evil Village.
Lycans and gentlemen, we thank you for waiting. And now let the games begin.
Let's see what you're Ethan Winters.
I swear, he makes every villain he voices so much more entertaining than they have the right to be.
This city works. This city provides. Everyone is fed, everyone is busy, everyone is entertained. And everyone has a reason to be happy.
But at what cost?
All the city asks in return is that we follow a few simple rules. Follow the rules, and you are rewarded. Break the rules, and you are corrected.
Come to think of it, all the voice actors did a great job here.
This year, I have a particular treat for the audience to enjoy.
Oh, you mean Tarquin and the droid poetry?
Bless that loquacious mechanical jewel. I was quite clear that it was to be our secret.
I can't think of a single performance that wasn't great.
To commence your Union City registration, please make your way to the immigration terminal.
That's okay, I'm not here to register. I'm looking for...
If you're looking for the immigration terminal, it's right over there. Thank you.
The only performance I wasn't a fan of was that of Foster.
Well, there's a weird security flag on Graham's ID. Maybe that's why I can't access his messages.
Oh?
And every time someone scans my U-chip, they notice the error.
It's not that it was bad, but for some reason he always sounded bored and uninterested.
A child, Milo, was abducted from a village out there and brought into Union City. And I think Graham was somehow connected.
Even in scenes that require a lot of emotions.
They made it. Thanks to Joey. They got away.
So you didn't take a ride with Wendell?
This is my city. I wasn't going to abandon it.
I'm glad you stayed.
I am so sorry, Robert. I know how much Joey meant to you.
Joey was my best friend.
I feel bad for criticizing his voice in the first game, because at least there he was a lot livelier than he is here.
I don't believe this is happening. This is total madness. You've all been warped in some way.
But children have been stolen from the Gap. And I'm going to open the city gates and get them out. Get them home.
I liked the visuals, I liked the story, I loved the writing, and I loved the voice acting. So how's the gameplay? From the footage you've seen so far, I think it's obvious that this isn't a point-and-click adventure like the first one. The game plays like your average 3D adventure game, with an over-the-shoulder camera. Controls are pretty solid. In fact, these are the best 3D controls I've seen by Revolution Software. I still have nightmares about In Cold Blood. It's obvious that Revolution Software did their homework this time around and actually played some 3D games to know how they should feel. The UI is also pretty good and quite intuitive. As you approach an interactable object, a reticule appears on top of it. When you press the action button, a drop menu of the actions you could take with this hotspot appears. So you don't even need to enter your inventory to use an item. You can just use it from this menu, which is pretty convenient. So as far as technical matters, I have nothing to complain about. Okay, maybe one thing. Some areas are a bit too big, so moving around could be a bit of a nuisance. But that's the only issue I have, and it's kinda negated by the pretty vistas. I just wish they took advantage of these big areas and actually had some sort of collectibles that you can get. At least I wouldn't feel annoyed when I reached the end of a long walkway and realized that there was nothing of importance there. Before we get into puzzles, I need to talk about the branching paths. See, much like in Broken Sword 5, you get different results based on what you say or what you do. Unlike Broken Sword 5 though, the results actually matter. Or at least they feel like they matter, but not really. For example, in this scene where you need to get this girl's brooch, you can either accept her offer to get the brooch in exchange for convincing her Ken-obsessed father to leave the museum, or you could decline her offer, or simply ruin your entire conversation with her. If you agree to help her, her father will feel confused by Ken's arm slapping him, and the girl gives you her brooch before trying to calm her father down by suggesting they go get his favorite drink. However, if you didn't agree to her offer, things go a bit differently. Now, instead of feeling confused, her father gets angry with Ken and decides that he wants to go back together with his wife. In his anger, he throws away his brooch, so you can get that one instead of his daughter's brooch. This is a lot better than what we saw in Broken Sword 5, however, when you think about it, nothing of importance really changed. You get the brooch either way, regardless of what you do. And it's not like you get to see these people ever again, so they won't have any impact on the story whatsoever. In fact, nothing you do has much of an impact on the story. Even the biggest choices you can make in the game are pretty inconsequential. Throughout the game, you get a few chances to change Songbird's attitude towards both her husband and Robert. For example, during the interview with Alonzo, answering his questions correctly or incorrectly determines whether or not Songbird gets to attend the Aspiration Gala.
I don't know who you are or what you've done with Graham, but I think we got away with that.
I hope so. I don't think that we would get away with it a second time.
Nor do I.
What in the name of Joey do you call that sorry performance?
Maybe I could have tried harder.
Look, Buster. Everything was fine until you turned up. I'd dragged my kudos all the way up to Class B for that gala. I don't want time off. I want my gala tickets.
And after finding her lost stuffed toy, you can either get rid of it or bring it back to her. If you helped her attend the gala and you brought her toy back, her attitude towards you starts to soften up.
You rescue them. All of them. You hear?
I will.
I believe you. Now let's get going.
And her opinions about her late husband start to change.
I think I've made a dreadful mistake. About Graham. I thought he was a loser, a fool. But he was one of the good guys, wasn't he?
He was. A brave man.
Taking this path will result in her saving Foster's life at the end of the game.
Goodbye, Graham Grundy.
That's not Graham Grundy!
However, if you took the other path, she sells Foster out to Alonzo and Joey ends up being the one saving him instead.
Goodbye, Graham Grundy.
This seems like an important change, but is it really? You never get to see Songbird after this scene, and the ending will be the exact same regardless of which path you take. Honestly, this barely seems like an improvement over Broken Sword 1. Sure, you don't have to have multiple endings, but at least have some changes in the way you get there. For example, you could have made it so that if Songbird doesn't betray Foster, and ends up saving him from Alonzo instead of Joey, this might result in Joey not dying. That would have given me a bigger incentive to make her betray Foster. Let's talk about the puzzles now. There are 3 types. The first are your average inventory-based puzzles. I'll be honest, I barely even remember these puzzles because of how easy and forgettable they are. They require very little thought. Remember that drop menu I talked about? Well, if the object you're interacting with requires an item, the game will give you the ability to use an inventory item on it. This option is only available when an object requires an item. So this already narrows things down, but it gets even easier. Because the game will also limit the items that could be used on the object. So you only have a maximum of 2 or 3 choices as to which item is required, and it's usually very obvious anyway. I don't like these puzzles, especially since the inventory-based puzzles in the first game were really well done. It's almost like the devs don't trust the player to figure out the puzzle on their own. The second type is logic puzzles, most of which are in link space and Minos space. Such as this one where you had to remove unauthorized applications on Grundy's and Leed's chips. There's also this one where you're playing as Joey, and you need to get rid of an android, so Orana can come out of hiding. I really like these puzzles, so it's a shame that there aren't that many of them. Same can't be said about the third type though. The third type of puzzles are hacking puzzles. This is where you use your hacking device to hack into particular devices or robots and change their behavior. The idea is you can hack into multiple devices at the same time, and if there are compatible nodes, you can change them around. For example, you can take the Pest PSA from a promotional panel and use it on the fireworks projector to distract the engineer long enough to pass through her office. Or in this part where you change this cleaning robot's behavior so that it would fly halfway up the building so that Raquel can use it to get back down. I love these puzzles a lot. as they can get quite tricky and experimenting with them can be really fun. Especially when you're exchanging the personality nodes between museum exhibits. I'll admit, I had way more fun than I thought I would doing this.
Who saved us from starving in sadness and hate? Savior, Joey! Put clothes on our backs and food on our plates. Savior, Joey! Who saved us from starving and sadness and hate? Savior, Joey! Put clothes on our backs and food on our plates. Savior, Joey! Who saved us from starving and sadness and hate? Savior Joey! Put clothes on our backs and food on our plates! Savior Joey!
What I liked most about these puzzles is how they always gave me that feeling of actually figuring something out on my own, rather than being guided by the game. In the Raquel puzzle, that cleaning robot was in the background, barely noticeable. So when you figure out that you can use it and change its behavior into going outside, you feel like you actually figured it out on your own. I loved that feeling, and I loved how dynamic these puzzles felt. Even though they're scripted and you're just doing what the developers wanted you to do, it rarely felt like that. One of my favorite examples is the one where you have to get Ken's hand to slap this man. That one was pretty ingenious. If you check the hand's attitude, you'll see that it's set to gently greet people. Nearby, you'll find an exhibit excitedly talking to anyone who presses its button. If you get that excitedly note from the exhibit to Joey's arm... Wait, I actually wrote Joey. Why did I write Joey in the script? I'm cancelling myself. I'm deleting this channel. That was a good run. The arm will start summoning this man. Once he's close enough to the arm, you then need to change its behavior again. Nearby, there's a robot that is aggressively cleaning the bathroom. So you need to find a way to get that aggressively node from the robot to Ken's arm. Once you do so, the arm will start slapping the guy. This was honestly my favorite hacking puzzle in the game because experimenting with it was so much fun. And not just for the humorous personality changing. However, as much as I loved these puzzles, they have the opposite problem of the logic puzzles. The devs kinda overdid it. There are so many of these puzzles, way too many honestly. It's like every other puzzle in the game is a hacking one. It even reached a point where my gizmo was out more often than it was in. Please don't take that out of context. Here's a golden rule for new game developers. When your game has hacking puzzles, and the day can be saved by hacking into a toaster, you've probably gone too far with the hacking puzzles. And that's Beyond the Steel Sky. Overall, I think it's a really good game. And even though I still think the first game didn't require a direct sequel, I'm glad we got one nonetheless. And I hope this won't be the last time we revisit this world. Maybe in future games we'll finally get to visit places other than Union City, such as Hobart for example. Or how about a game set in the Gap? An open world adventure game perhaps? After playing Broken Sword 5 and Beyond the Steel Sky, I am now actually looking forward to Revolution Software's next game, whatever it may be. And I hope we will get to see games other than sequels to Broken Sword and Beneath the Steel Sky. Maybe a revival of Lure of the Temptress? I'd love to see an HD version of this. Honestly, after the awful In Cold Blood, the boring Broken Sword 3, and the mediocre Broken Sword 4, it's nice to see the team making good games again. Anyway, that's all for this video. If you enjoyed it and would like to see more, do consider subscribing to my channel. Hitting the like button won't hurt either. And if you enjoy my work and want to support it, you can do so on Patreon. Or if you're scared of commitment, you can do one-time donations on Ko-fi. If you want to watch something whilst waiting for Revolution Software's next game, I've reviewed every single game made by them on my channel, so you can go watch those. Until next time, thank you for watching.